On October the 7th, you tweeted, "Give them hell, Netanyahu. Enough is enough." And you got some blowback for that, as everybody
a lot.
says anything about this. Were you surprised by the scale of the blowback? Do you wish you'd phrased that tweet differently? Do you have any regrets about it?
Well, I was upset because I had developed somewhat of a Muslim following on YouTube, and I was very happy about that. A lot of people on the Islamic side of the world were watching my biblical lectures, for example, and and I've had extensive conversations with Muslims on my YouTube channel, and I burnt some of that up.
Hello everyone, and happy Halloween. I hope everyone had a good one if you did something. I hope you like the pumpkins me and my girlfriend carved, and I hope you like my outfit. I've gone as either the spectre of communism haunting Europe, thank you Vietnam for selling me this $5 hammer and sickle shirt, or I'm just like the ghost of Fidel Castro, who I never actually thought I looked like until I saw this photo of him, which even I have to admit kind of looks like me, which is really weird. Maybe I'm actually related to Justin Trudeau. And as I'm getting older, Halloween is just an excuse to like play horror games and eat loads of like pizza and donuts and stuff. So let me know what you guys did for Halloween and if you had a good one. But today we're talking about something extra scary. We're talking about the Joker himself, Jordan Peterson. Now, about a year ago, nearly exactly a year ago, I made a video about all Jordan Peterson's Muslim fan base turning on him. And the reason they did it was pretty simple. He had a meeting with Netanyahu and Ben Shapiro, and he was promoting about how great Israel was. And it might even seem weird to you that Jordan Peterson even has a Muslim fan base, but we're going to talk about that today. But he enraged them even further because once Israel announced its intentions for Gaza, he said, give them hell, and tagged Netanyahu in the comment. Now, realizing that a lot of his audience are still Muslim, despite so many of them turning against him last year, he has seemingly walked back a few of the comments, and he actually wrote like a pretty lengthy piece in the Telegraph, which he read out like completely on his YouTube channel, basically trying to walk back some of his endorsement of what Israel are doing. And it shows the fundamental contradiction with a lot of these people in like North American conservative spheres, in that they are massive Western chauvinists and they hate Muslims and they are racist as well, right? So they're trying to reconcile that with also being very pro-traditional values. So that's why they had like conservative Muslim fans in the first place. But obviously, even conservative Muslims are still pro-Palestine, despite the fact that lots of their governments have sold them out to the Israeli government. They are still pro-Palestinian while being anti-woke. So while they like Jordan Peterson for the anti-woke stuff, they don't like him for the pro-Israel stuff, and that's actually a red line for a lot of them. So we're just going to talk about all of this today and talk about, the contradictions, talk about him walking stuff back, and just talk about like Western chauvinism in general. So all of that coming up for you today. Follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on basically everything. Consider becoming a patron if you want to support my work continuing for the future. And yeah, just check out everything down in the description. But like I said, Jordan Peterson has had a Muslim fan base for a while. And if I don't think I've illustrated the point enough, I might cut in some parts from this video I made a year ago. But like I said, Jordan Peterson for the longest time has been a Western chauvinist. And he has stood with people who are absolute like Islamophobic, racist bigots towards Muslims. Douglas Murray being chief among them. And they actually had a picture together the other day. But Jordan Peterson is also pro-Israel as a part of this, like many of these types are. Like the intellectual dark web, even though it was often, had a lot of criticism of religion in general, they were always anti-Islam more than anything else. And because they believe in Western chauvinism, they still believe a lot of Western values come from the Bible and Western tradition, which is influenced by Christianity. So that's why you get like new atheists like Sam Harris supporting Israel, because they firmly view it as Western values good, Muslims, backwards, barbarians will send us to the Dark Ages and stuff. Of course, it obviously helps they have a revisionist view of history in terms of how they depict Western Christian history versus how they depict Arab Muslim history. Like you only have to play Assassin's Creed Mirage and read the actual history in the game to realize that maybe this view of history you've been fed your whole life about Muslim Arabs being backwards is pretty much based on racist propaganda and Orientalism. But nevertheless, despite all of that, Jordan Peterson did acquire a Muslim fan base. And a lot of Muslims liked what they saw as his crusade against wokeness. Now, although wokeness might not be in like the lexicon of conservative Muslims living in the Middle East or Asia or something, it's still something they liked because conservative Muslims don't like left-wing politics, conservative Muslims don't like challenges to a gender binary, or they don't like acceptance of the LGBT community. Although some Muslim countries do have different stances on transgender people, like Pakistan, for example, something that largely unites conservative Muslims, wherever you find them, is not liking wokeness, as we kind of understand it from the right-wing point of reference. So when Jordan Peterson starts, even his birth of his social media career going against trans rights, talking about how using correct pronouns will lead us to gulags, that is something that can resonate with religious conservatives, no matter where you find them, right? And there was actually a reporter who went to Lebanon and found his books everywhere. When I was in Vietnam and Thailand last year, Jordan Peterson books translated for those countries. Obviously, Thailand has a fairly sizable Muslim population in the south as well. But a lot of these Muslims turned on Jordan Peterson at the end of last year for two reasons. Because he went to a trip to Israel, he visited the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but he visited it with the Israeli government. Obviously, it's a really important place in Islam. It's on my sign right there. And also he made a video that was a message to Muslims, but it really played up the Abraham Accords, a Trump administration initiative to try and normalize relations between Israel and the remaining Arab states that still don't have like normalization with Israel, right? But it was a firmly pro-Israeli initiative. And in this video, basically, it's just insanely racist, orientalist, all that garbage. I'll play you a little bit of it. It's Jordan Peterson calling on Muslims to be peaceful, essentially. And he's saying that, reach across the sectarian divide. And God forbid, even reach out to a Jew. Because we know you guys all hate Jews. So, why don't you guys do that? And then we'll have peace in the Middle East and peace in the Muslim world.
And that the comments from the Muslim watchers and listeners to my YouTube channel and podcast have been so extraordinarily positive. And all this is lovely to see in the aftermath of the extraordinary Abraham Accords, which have laid out the possibility for peace between all the people of the book in an unprecedented manner. It is time for those of you in the Muslim world to stop fighting among yourselves, you Shiites and Sunnis, and also time to stop regarding the Christians, and even more specifically, the Jews, as your enemies, not least because you have the enemy located in the wrong place. Far more unites you with the other people of the book, as your own prophet himself, peace be unto him, forthrightly said, than what divides you. You are all threatened, in a very real sense, by the system of vengeful Luciferian ideas that currently confronts all that is transcendent, traditional, and valuable on the sexual front, on the familial front, on the conceptual front, on the psychological and sociological front. And I should also point out that it is not the individual carriers of the woke, politically correct, degenerate, neo-Marxist ideas that should be regarded as the enemy either. Muslims, reach across the sectarian divide. Shiites, find a Sunni pen pal. Communicate with someone on the other side. Sunnis, do the same. And then, maybe, reach out, tentatively, to a Christian, or even, heaven forbid, a Jew. Because perhaps it is time for those who purport to be followers of God to act like it.
Yeah, I hopefully played some of it for you there, but just insanely racist, and of course got a good backlash, because I don't even need to tell you that just because there is sectarianism in the world doesn't mean people from different backgrounds can't get on. Like, for example, Northern Ireland still has a load of sectarianism. Doesn't mean Protestants from Union backgrounds and Catholics from Republican backgrounds don't ever get along. It's the same in Iraq as well, terrible sectarian violence there over the last 20 years. But these communities still get along. They share the same country, right? And although you still have those problems, doesn't mean these people never get on with each other, and also completely ignores the history of Jews and Muslims together as well, where Jews and Muslims in various times in history have lived in peace and harmony. And if you go to places like New York, for example, there is always historic ties between Muslim and Jewish communities there. It's not really a binary thing that all Muslims just hate Jews. And that's probably playing into his views on Israel, because he believes that the views against Israel from the Muslim world are fundamentally all about them being Jews, rather than it being this settler colonial project done on Muslims, and also done in the place where one of the holiest sites in Islam is, which the Israelis attack and stuff, right? Could never be that. It must just be because all Muslim people don't like Jewish people, according to Jordan Peterson. And maybe I'll play you some of the comments I read out from the other one, because they were really annoyed about both these things. They were really annoyed that Jordan Peterson would side with Netanyahu and go to this trip of Israel to promote basically the Israeli state. So he posted this on his Instagram on the 10th of November, had about 200,000 likes. But literally go on this yourselves. I'm not making this up. I didn't edit this. Every single comment in order is actively turning against him. So here's one. How can you criticize Trudeau so hard, rightfully so, and not put any critique next to this post against Netanyahu? You should have stayed true to what you've said. You should uphold the morals you teach in front of everyone. A handshake that's stained with blood. With all the knowledge and intellect you possess, how do you fail to see the corruption and the evil they hold and gruesome vile acts they vomit against Palestinians? It's so sad to see you there. What the F, man? You lost a lot of people's respect. How come you haven't noticed anything wrong during your time there? Jordan Peterson is a good man. He's sitting with a wrong person. It's such a shame. How can a mind so great be so easily deceived? I'm glad these people are waking up. I genuinely believe Peterson is concerned about the flourishing of mankind against the repressive powers of tyranny, yet here he is in bed with a tyrant. And also that he was trying to basically say all the violence in the region is Muslims' fault, and it's because of Islam, and it's because you're intolerant. So if we're going to solve that, I call on you Muslims, be more peaceful and just like work together to be more peaceful. I want to read a couple of the YouTube comments that responded to his video. In the comments saying, "Hi Jordan, I'm from Baghdad, Iraq, and I would like to tell you that Sunni and Shiites live together in Iraq peacefully. Some of our families contain a Sunni mother and a Shiite father, or vice versa. Some of my best lifelong friends are Christian, and I walked by a church last month and saw a priest saying goodbye to a smiling family leaving the church. Rest assured that the majority of Muslim people are peaceful and loving, but the actions of some bigoted minority sometimes, unfortunately, leave a stronger impression." So that already had alienated a lot of Jordan Peterson's fans, because, you know, a lot of people, that is the red line, not going to accept you supporting Israel, not going to accept like basically this racist view of Muslims as all like barbarians and inherently violent. But then it came that Jordan Peterson also endorsed Netanyahu's government's like disgusting, disproportionate pushback to the attacks from October 7th. So Peterson tweeted, "Give him hell, Netanyahu, enough is enough." And that is not ambiguous in the slightest. He's basically saying, do whatever you want. And that's what the Israeli government are doing. He's endorsing that. Same with our lovely leader of the opposition, Keith Starmer, reiterated this today, our Prime Minister, the leaders of the EU, all these disgusting people. Like, the only governments I can think have remotely been good on this is the Scottish government, the Irish government, and the Spanish government. It's pretty much like literally those three countries in the whole like Western sphere have actually said anything that points towards peace in the region and not giving the Israelis like a blank check to do whatever they want. Now, Jordan Peterson went on Piers Morgan where he spoke about both these things. If I can't play the video, I'm going to play the audio. And he talked about, you know, why he wrote this, because he realizes, oh, hang on a sec, maybe a lot of my income is tied to like Muslim fans who really like me. I've just endorsed someone like they absolutely hate doing terrible actions that the Muslim world are just not going to forget. Let's try and walk that back a little bit. So listen to what he said to Piers Morgan.
On October the 7th, you tweeted, "Give them hell, Netanyahu, enough is enough." And you got some blowback for that, as everybody
a lot.
says anything about this. Were you surprised by the scale of the blowback? Do you wish you'd phrased that tweet differently? Do you have any regrets about it?
Well, you know, I was upset because I had developed somewhat of a Muslim following on YouTube, and I was very happy about that. A lot of people on the Islamic side of the world were watching my biblical lectures, for example, and you know, and I've had extensive conversations with Muslims on my YouTube channel, and you know, I burnt some of that up, And I'm not sure I did that, well, I would say I'm certain I didn't do that in the most productive manner. And so, do I regret it? It would have been better to do the long form, to have done the long form to begin with, you know? And Twitter invites and rewards a certain amount of impulsivity, and it wasn't, I don't know, Piers, I don't know if it's ever time for impulsive action, especially when the stakes are serious, you know?
So do I believe that Jordan Peterson actually regrets what he said, as he seems to indicate there? No. Does he regret it in terms of ideologically? No. Does he regret it in terms of, oh damn, I have a lot of Muslim fans and I've just said something that is basically unforgivable on top of the stuff I was doing last year? That's the main reason he cares about this stuff as well. Like, yeah, Jordan Peterson talking about being impulsive, being bad. This guy is absolutely unhinged on Twitter. Like, I've made like maybe 2 or 3 videos about his insane Twitter feed. And one time he was tweeting like 100 times in an hour, which included like multiple retweets and quote tweets of himself. Tweeting the Joker like 5 times in an hour. Like, this guy's self-reflection is just insane to me. It's like he has an alter ego. Like, the Peterson version of Tyler Durden is the guy who tweets and this is the guy who speaks. But he also kind of like walked back some of his pro-Israel stuff. But I think it's really like a centrist take to try and appeal to his Muslim followers. So listen to this as well.
I don't think Israel's going away, but I don't think the Palestine isn't going away either. And so those things have to be accepted. It looks to me like they have to be accepted as on-the-ground realities. Now, the problem I've seen continually, I don't know, is that it's been convenient to use the Palestinians as an irritant to Israel in the West. And so the Palestinians have been held hostage. You know, the people who portray them as innocent victims presume that the Palestinians have been held hostage by the Jews, let's say. But I would say the Palestinians have been held hostage even more effectively by their own leadership and by those who are perfectly willing to use them as the front man, the expendable front man to irritate Israel in the West. Well, you can't get peace under those circumstances, you know, and so Palestine is a reality that isn't going to go away, and Israel's a reality that isn't going to go away, and the Abraham Accords started to recognize that, and there was move in the right direction, and if that falls apart, we're going to be back to where we were 15 years ago, except worse.
So again, talking about the Abraham Accords, which, like I said, is like the normalization of relationships between Israel and like a couple of Gulf monarchies and stuff. And that's not a good thing, in my opinion, because it's just all the Arab world's elite selling out the Palestinians and not representing their people who are overwhelmingly pro-Palestine. Like, have you seen some of these protests in the Middle East? They're insane. Like the ones I've seen in Yemen and stuff, like so many people. Like, I thought the one I went to was big in London, which was like apparently 300,000 people. There was another one last week, which was upwards of 500,000 people. There's going to be another one on Saturday, which could be even bigger. And that's in the UK. The UK, which does have a big Muslim population, but at the same time, these countries overwhelmingly support Palestine. And Jordan Peterson acting like that, oh yeah, the leadership of Palestine is provoking Israel and they'll never have peace under those circumstances. Again, blaming the insurgents fighting occupation and apartheid because they started this whole thing, did they? Or are they a symptom of occupation and apartheid and colonialism, which Jordan Peterson seems to not realise because he's a Western chauvinist, right? He wants Israel to exist, but he probably wants Israel to exist even more than it does, which a lot of the Israeli leadership want to claim Gaza and the West Bank for Israel as well. Because they believe in this more religious form of Zionism, which they believe everything in the region belongs to Israel. So yeah, Jordan Peterson, I don't think really walking it back, but trying to be like, oh, you have to accept the reality that Palestine exists and Israel exists. But anyway, he did write a lengthy article for The Telegraph, and I want to read some of it for you today. And he read this out on his YouTube channel. I guess this was like his apology, kind of, to the Muslims he offended. And it was called "This Unholy Axis of Iranian Thugs and Marxist Psychopaths is an Enemy of Muslims Too." Again, that is a weird combination. It reminds me of that tweet I saw today about apparently The only reason Ireland is anti-Israel is because Iranian intelligence agents or something. So the attack on Israel by the monsters of Hamas occurred not because Muslims and Jews are destined by religious necessity to be at each other's throats, but because Hamas's biggest supporters in Iran, a country run by thugs and deemed so even by its own people, had become concerned that the rulers of Saudi Arabia would continue in their laudable attempts to formulate a productive peace in Israel. 4 countries signed the Abraham Accords, a Trump-era initiative that should have garnered that ex-president, for all his faults, a Nobel Peace Prize. Behind the current signatories, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan, stood the Saudis, without whose tacit agreement no such steps would have been taken, and everyone knew it. Despite being snubbed, so insultingly, and their consequent and justified anger, the Saudis had been strongly considering the continuation and extension of the Abrahamic peace process. In consequence, the totalitarian mullahs of Iran, working with Hamas, were driven to desperation, knowing full well that such an agreement would undermine and isolate them fatally. This is the same Iran, by the way, that the Democrats under Biden have failed to resist and control. I also find it funny how Iran is totalitarian, but a country run by a royal family that promotes Wahhabism is, a free democracy or something? All this means, therefore, that the Saudis could have been on side 2 years ago had Biden seized the opportunity, thereby negating Hamas's and Iran's primary aim in attacking Israel. So here we are with Israeli and Palestinian blood once again being spilled. So an appeal to Muslims. There are many Muslims willing to believe conspiratorial narratives about Jewish people, which is just the most ironic thing considering Jordan Peterson talks about cultural Marxism nonstop. Many of these narratives, if one looks at their source, are deliberately spread by the brutal Iranian regime. I might inquire of the Muslims who accept such stories, is Iran your idea of a worthy Islamic state? I would also ask the Muslims to consider those in the West who have allied themselves with the cause of Palestinians in the days since the invasion. Many of those university students and radical professors you see as your allies are Marxists, like me, for example. Remember, the essential and absolute enemy of the communist utopia is the very religious practice you share with your Abrahamic brothers. Then there's the increasingly delusional alphabet brigade of the LGBT community, foolish and blind enough to assume that the commonality of hypothetical oppression is enough to unite. However, somehow with the mullahs of Tehran and the gangsters of Hamas, this is useful idiocy on a scale undreamed of by the most extreme of Leninists and Maoists alike. Tell me this honestly, those of you desirous of genuinely practice your faith, do you really think you have anything in common with those who have hypothetically sided with you in the West in the past week? And tell me again how that alliance is more suitable to your faith and the recognition of your Abrahamic commonality with the Christians and the present-day descendants of the ancient Hebrews. I would argue that the Saudis and the other signers of the Abraham Accords have a stark choice in front of them, as do the disturbed and various peoples of the Islamic world. They can allow the thugs, particularly those in Iran and Palestine, to triumph. They can, in consequence, scuttle the new peace deal with Israel, forego the benefits to the Muslim world, or they can consider the universal message in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity alike: do not attribute to yourself the virtue of the divine when acting on your own behalf, let alone when acting in the thrall of the forces of darkness themselves. I plead with those reading in the Muslim world, remove the blindfold and see what is so starkly manifesting itself in the world: toxic ideologies, whether from Iran or pseudo-Marxists in the West. We must all of us turn away from the terrible tempting path of righteous destruction, continue the work already begun in uniting the people of the book, and thereby bring a productive, generous, wise, and lasting peace to this benighted but still not yet doomed and even potentially wonderfully green and blue orb. So it's probably not surprising Jordan Peterson's grasp on international relations is pretty terrible, considering he thought the Russian-Ukrainian war was about wokeness and stuff. But that's kind of how he's framing that. He's basically saying, Muslims who are so outraged at what Israel is doing, can you not see you actually have more in common with Israel? Because a lot of them believe in Judaism, even though a lot of Israelis don't actually believe in the religion or aren't that religious. And you should side with them rather than side with the Marxists in the West and the LGBT community, because you do not want that degenerate ideology to spread to you guys, right? And he fundamentally doesn't understand. He's also blaming everything that's happening on Iran. Iran historically hasn't even been the main backer of Hamas specifically, more Hezbollah. But even so, there are still Arab countries probably covertly still helping the Palestinians. And I would say the Saudis are probably one of them. But it's just interesting how he frames this, because he's acting like the governments and the monarchies of Morocco Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and stuff, that's representative of the will of the Islamic world, which is overwhelmingly pro-Palestine. And they side with the Palestinians because of the occupation, apartheid, and how Israel treat them, right? And that is like the main issue. And the main reason Arab countries have sold out to the Israeli government is not because they've suddenly realized that, oh, we have actually like a lot in common with Orthodox Jews and stuff. It's just capitalism. Are you seriously telling me Saudi Arabia, which is one of the most conservative religious places in terms of its government, the people there just suddenly accept Israel? Like suddenly Islam is not important to them anymore. This key issue in the Islamic community is not important. They're just going to accept Israel, right? And everyone should follow their lead. Of course not. The Abraham Accords was worked on by Jared Kushner, who is firmly in bed with the Saudi investment fund, the government's own investment fund, right? And that investment fund has funded a ton of his stuff, and that's partly to do with the Abraham Accords. But yeah, it's just to create better business ties between the elite of all these countries. It's like Egypt as well. Egypt has good relationships with the Israeli government too, despite its people being overwhelmingly pro-Palestine. It literally is just nation states governments selling out the will of their people to continue funding and helping with this Israeli apartheid because they don't have the will to stand up to it anymore. And also you have the US pressuring them in the background to actually normalize relations between all of them. But it's funny he thinks at this moment he can appeal to conservative Muslims' views on the LGBT community or Marxists in general, or Marxist ideology, to try and stop them from siding with the Palestinians in this issue. It's just not going to work. Also ignores that there has been a lot of Marxist and socialist tradition in the Muslim world as well. Like the government of Afghanistan was like literally communist, and that's before the Soviets invaded. Like it was like an organic movement within the country to make it socialist. And there has been a lot of these movements throughout the Middle East, and even if they don't necessarily agree with Marxist view on social things, Marxists have historically helped Arab countries struggle against Western colonialism. And you know, Fidel Castro, very pro-Palestinian, most of the socialist world, very pro-Palestinian, and they've actually armed the Arabs against the Israelis, and they armed the Arabs against the colonialism by the West, right? So a lot of the Arab world do still remember, because even sometimes they're using the weapons still, that socialists and Marxists actually helped their struggle for independence, right? So even if they don't agree now with the modern Marxist views on, I don't know, LGBT rights, for example, they still do remember that Marxists helped their armed struggle because that's what Marxists believe in as well. One more thing I want to note as well, Jordan Peterson appealing to conservative Muslims' views on the LGBT community is very interesting because of what Israel is perceived to be as well. Like Israel's propaganda, I made a video on this the other week, it woke washes its apartheid by promoting its LGBT community and how tolerant it is and stuff like that, right? Israel does that. And originally, Westerners didn't like Israel because they viewed it as a socialist state. They viewed it as a bunch of socialist Jews who made their own country. So a lot of people hated that originally. And people forget the US backing for Israel really became massive after the 6-Day War. They weren't originally like besties with Israel after the war because a lot of people who went to Israel after World War II and actually fought to create the state of Israel were actually people who had fought for the communists in World War II, right? Jordan Peterson needs to remember that if you're trying to appeal to conservative Muslims' views on social values, then they're not going to like Israel either. They might agree with some Orthodox Jews and stuff on certain things, but they're not going to agree largely on what is written into law in Israel about things like the LGBT community, which I would remind people isn't as good as stuff you get in like Western Europe, although Israel likes to pretend it is. Jordan Peterson has a very interesting view on this stuff and a very simplistic view of, oh, can't we admit that we're all anti-woke, so let's unite to fight the Marxists rather than fight each other? But it also fundamentally just doesn't understand why the conflict exists in the first place. It exists because of colonialism, apartheid, and just constant Israeli expansion into Palestinian territory, right? And if you're going to ignore that in your analysis means nothing. And it just feels like Jordan Peterson's saying all this stuff to try and to get into the good books of his Muslim fans, but at the same time, he can't help himself. So he's trying to act like, oh, we should all unite against the left rather than fight each other, rather than trying to acknowledge or even analyze why the Islamic world do support the Palestinians. But anyway, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.